Hi, this is Ankit. I'm a co-founder at ClearFeed.ai. At ClearFeed, we host customer success and support leaders to come and chat with us about how they're using technology in innovative ways to help improve customer experience, make it smarter, better, efficient from their perspective. We have today with us Greg Bakken, who's head of solutions and support at Glean. Glean is one of our early adopters at ClearFeed. And we're going to chat today about how Glean is using Slack to onboard customers and support customers on an ongoing basis, and how they use ClearFeed and how and what are the efficiencies that ClearFeed has driven for them. So thanks a lot, Greg, for joining us today.
No problems. Happy to help.
Cool. So why don't you tell us a bit about Glean and what problems do you solve for your customers?
Sure. At Glean, we provide a search solution for customers. What we like to equate ourselves as like Google for work, where the problem of information that you need in your enterprise is scattered across many different applications, SaaS applications. You have, Google Drive, you have, Confluence, you have Slack, you have, like everything, Jira, Confluence, Salesforce. So many people use these applications on a day-to-day basis, but there's no central way for you to find the content, and especially relevant content for yourself to do your job. So you have to keep going from system to system to go like, where did I have that document, or where can I find information about this topic or this document? And we provide a really nice, rich interface, easy to use for end users, so they can find everything that they need to do their job. We also, because we have access to the content and allow users to access content in a permissions enforced way, they can discover new information items and, about people who are working on different topics, especially in large companies. This is like a really difficult problem to solve. And so we help, streamline that part of the process and make work productivity a big thing for our customers.
So that's pretty cool. It seems a pretty involved product and a deep product that requires multiple integration touch points and potentially multiple stakeholders who end up using the product. So talk to us a bit about that dynamic. It seems pretty involved and pretty closely, deep onboarding kind of a product. So maybe share about
sure. So like onboarding for us is basically just getting the customer to agree to do a pilot with us, and really like understanding how we solve business problems for them using our product. And so what we generally do is we will work with the customer to build basically their production environment for them to pilot and test. And sometimes that test is with like a subset of users at their company. Sometimes it's just like, hey, we want to deploy it to everybody and ultimately try it out and see if we're getting the value we expect out of it. So like really touching on the integration points is that what we do is we set up a bare bones project that the customer will either customer hosts or we host in our cloud tenant. And it's a dedicated project to the specific customer for their pilot and ultimately, again, their production. And so what we do is we set it up on their behalf. And then we work with their administrators to connect all the different data sources to our system. We make it super easy. For most customers, we can actually finish like getting the setup done in like a half-hour call with the customer. And then we run a series of processes in the background, and then we hand over the product to them and their end users. So when we do this process, we work very closely with the customer over Slack. And on Zoom calls when needed. If we need to do something synchronously, we'll do a Zoom call. If it's asynchronously, we can do that all over Slack.
So it's very interesting that you bring that about, right? So, and I think it's a huge debate out in the SaaS world, whether you should open up these Slack channels and kind of be, kind of inherently or, subconsciously commit that we are always available. So I'm sure like you guys would have thought a lot about, whether you should do it, whether you should not do it. So I would love to learn about, why did you guys decide to, be there or be always on, right? Or in some kind of ways, kind of setting that expectations to customers. So curious to learn the thought process behind.
Yeah, so I think from the very start, our our founder's perspective, and then from once I joined as well, I think we've always had this perspective that we are very customer driven and that we need to be like highly available and responsive to customers so that we give them a great experience. That not only do we give them a great product, but then they understand that we as a company are committed to them and making them successful. So we felt like Slack was our best, channel for them because it's always on. Most all of our customers have Slack, so we can do Slack Connect channels with them, for example. And so we felt this was like a great way for us to deliver the service and then give them the response time that they need, because several of our customers are in different time zones. So where we needed to, we could sort of swarm on them in different times, or we can work asynchronously and then just schedule those times when we wanted, sort of meet live time and stuff like that. It just makes things so much easier. Where we also noticed that for customers who didn't have Slack or just wanted to work over email, all the delays in communication just started piling up. So we said, look, let's use Slack as our standard for working with customers.
So interesting and quite intriguing, the things that you bring about, right? That it kind of brings you closer to customers, faster response, and it pretty much looks like an extended team, right? That you are really helping them kind of move forward with things. So, but just curious to learn, right? I'm sure when you would have started, you would have just been 10 channels with first 10 customers, but how's it evolved, right? How many channels do you have? And also maybe talk a bit about your team as well, right? How you set the team in terms of managing all of this with customers.
Yeah, so let me break it down into life cycle real quickly. So during the sales and the pilot process, we have the account executive, the salesperson basically, and then the solutions engineer, the basically pre-sales SA. They're the primary people working with the customer during that initial stage, the pilot, and then moving into sale. Towards the end of the pilot, we involved the customer success team to basically become a known person in the account, because they will eventually take over the account from the sale point through launch to their company and the lifetime of the customer. So that's how we sort of orchestrate it. And then my team, specifically solutions and support, we're on the sort of come in a little bit after the CSM comes into the account. We're on the post-sales side. So generally we don't get highly involved in the pilots, but once the sale is made, then we become also a known player to the customer. So that's a little bit about the life cycle. So again, from my team's perspective, we're primarily focused on post-sale, but because we're a startup, we also bleed into the pre-sale and we help out the solutions engineer and so forth. So, just do what it takes to get the job done.
Yeah. So curious to know at what point do you guys commit into, hey, let's open a Slack channel and kind of open up the red carpet, very closely?
Yeah, we do that right when we start trying to arrange the pilot. So so basically we'll create the Slack Connect channel, we'll send the share request to them, or they'll put it on theirs and then share it to us, and then we'll have a new Slack Connect channel. And then the account executive who coordinates this then adds the requisite people that are needing to work in the account there. In some cases it's us, some cases it's engineers, because oftentimes when we're working with a customer, they may have questions that are a little bit deeper past the sort of surface layer of the product. And so sometimes engineers will hop in and jump in. And again, that's why we really like Slack, because we can just add people in, at any time to work on a particular issue, and then they can drop off if they want, or they can just stay in channel and, just see what's going on with that particular customer.
Pretty cool. So how many customers or how many channels approximately in terms of ranges do you have now, and how is it evolving?
Yeah, so now we have about 90 active customers, and then typically at any time we have 20 to 30 pilots, or sort of moving towards pilots channels open. But amongst those, amongst the 90 customers, some of them have multiple channels, because they might have purpose channels where we would have one channel for admins and one channel for their users, or one channel for a specific project thread. Maybe we're doing some custom implementation and we don't want to crowd the other channel or channels with that content. So we just break out a new Slack Connect channel for a particular project.
So it's very interesting that you bring out a very interesting point, right? That you have a different channel for admins and something different for users, and then project
Mhm.
specific channel also. So I think project specific, we understand that you probably want to, you don't want to crowd on everyone, but what's the thought behind different channels for admins and users, and what are some of the learnings from that?
I think because admins, we coordinate different types of activities, and then like ultimately the admins speak for the users. So we will like to try to channelize that communication, or we might say, hey, we're going to go add source A or source B or something like that. And the admins don't want the users to know yet until it's like done. So like we may be working on a project and we don't want like sometimes they may not want the users to go like, hey, I'm going to go try this now when it's still like in progress. So like I think it's a nice way to sort of separate the conversations. But for some customers, they're like, fine. They're like, hey, we don't mind that. Or like, we'll have some users in here and then they can find out about these things. Like some customers are not fussy about that. And then we also do have some customers who don't want any user channel because they want to do all the support of their users by themselves. And so they won't add any end users into our channel, and it will be admin only. So we really just give the customer the choice on how they want to, like use the channel or channels and so forth. And then we support them accordingly.
Pretty cool. So fairly interesting insights on this one. And it's interesting that different customers have different ways to deal with it and have different preferences in terms of segmentation of admins and users and so on. Cool. So very curious to learn about, so I mean, I'm assuming 90 customers, so potentially at least 90 channels, if not more, right? I mean, probably.
Yeah, it's more. Yeah, it's like, I'd say it's like probably like 120 something.
Yeah. So talk to me about, I'm sure, how does your Slack look like when you get up in the morning and then kind of look at multiples of these channels, right? So talk to me about managing all of this,
Yeah.
because it must
So,
be.
so managing it is an interesting set of tasks, right? So for me personally, because I'm still a CSM on some accounts, I actually like separate. I have created my own group of Slack channels for my customers, and the other CSMs do the same, so that we can look at our customers at priority when we wake up in the morning, or before we go to bed at night, and just make sure that everything, like all the general threads, are taken care of. So as like, so again, most CSMs will have like their account specific groupings in Slack, using the groups of channels and so forth. And so for me, as I've been moving more into this like shared role where I have less customers, I just like have the customers in groups separated between like production customers and then pre-production customers, like in sales mode customers, so that like, again, I'm generally not going to look that heavily at the ones in the sales process, but I might peek on them on an occasion, but they are the ones I just will do that. But actually, this is one of the things that really is helpful in having ClearFeed, and we can talk about this when piece of it when you're ready as well.
Sure. Interesting. So we'll probably get to that in a bit, but I'm curious to also learn. So how big is the team? And as you added more people, did you see, I mean, from your perspective now, I mean, there are folks who, are looking at it and no longer probably you as the primary owner, right? So how did that dynamic, right? Maybe talk a bit about that before getting into, more about ClearFeed. Yeah.
Yeah, so as we hired more CSMs, it was like basically like almost all of them have, it was like nobody had to tell them this. They basically just went to Slack. They had their customers assigned to them. They either transitioned those customers from me or took them net new as new customers were getting signed. And so it was just a natural flow for them to go to Slack and organize their channels to focus their priorities on their customer channels. And then whatever other groupings that they may use again. So like, I think if I look at every CSM, their first batch of channels in their UI are their customer channels.
Cool. And
yeah, and then as far as my team, again, right now I have, one customer solutions engineer and myself. We cover all of the support issues, and I have one solutions architect who covers primarily projects. And we have two hires that are coming on board in a couple of weeks.
Pretty interesting, right? So now that you have a system and a way of looking at things, it probably makes it easier for you to scale it up. As you went on from probably 10 channels to these hundreds of channels, right? So I would first maybe want you to chat about, what were some of the problems that you faced, and then when you thought about, how did ClearFeed fit into some of those? So maybe talk a bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, I'm used to coming in and working on scaling teams and scaling, processes and building tools that will help us achieve scale so that we don't have to massively grow like a team to do a lot of manual tasks. So like part of what the thought process was that I really want a tool because ultimately we're going to have like hundreds of channels. And so like in a day, for example, like if I'm looking and I'm just basically scanning channels, especially customer channels, like that's already like a lot of like focus time to go do that, or to keep sweeping up and down to see if there's any issues or questions that are not being addressed and so forth. So like I really wanted to figure out like, well, what can I do to channelize all the things that are coming into those channels into one place, so that I don't have to always like click the white highlighted channel every time just to go discover stuff. I want to find where I can see validated requests or like a hey, some action needs to happen. So coming up like getting a solution like that, I think will really help us scale, because again, I don't think my team will be like huge, but like we need a way to be able to discover all the things that are important to customers and make sure that they're being addressed. So again, I think it's one of our most important things, so that we maintain the high level of like customer experience and satisfaction with both our service and our product. So having something like that is going to help us scale. I mean, I think it's already helping, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But yeah.
Sure. So it's interesting that you want to make sure that things are being responded to, the customer experience that you're offering, and the primary reason why you opened up those channels, right? Those are not broken and adhered to. And I mean, it's also interesting that you point out that if somebody's managing, let's say 20-30 of these channels, you want to make sure that all kind of open questions which are not answered are channelized at one place together. So a bit about how ClearFeed helps in that context, right? So what does it do that really solves this problem for you?
Yeah, so basically we have one channel for post-sales and one channel for pre-sales. So that means that like our pre-sales SC really just needs to look at one channel and see like, here's the requests I need to go spend some time or pay some attention to. We're still onboarding him to using it, or trying to leverage it a bit more regularly, because again, he has like a ton of channels to watch for issues and so forth. And then like on the post-sales side for myself and Molly and Patrick, we feel really strongly that we'll start, relying on this as our primary source of looking for, for issues that we need to go address. And also CSMs, we are on the process of onboarding. We've shown them at least that, how all the requests funnel into one channel, so that like ideally, like if they're looking at that, instead of having to look at all their customer channels, they may be able to like pick up and intercept requests, like for example, acknowledge the request, not resolve it. For example, like, hey, I'm going to acknowledge it so that, Greg and Molly and Patrick don't need to look at it because this is in my wheelhouse. So sort of channelizes our ability to focus our effort on the right types of responses to customers.
Pretty interesting. I'm sure, like just from a cognitive load perspective, just looking at one place to start your day or start the next wave of getting back to customers must be extremely helpful. So cool. Also, I mean, I'm sure we've talked a lot about this, but I'm sure with enterprise, I mean, you deal with probably some of the largest enterprise customers. A lot of them are NASDAQ 100, Cloud 100 companies, and so on. So curious to learn. I mean, didn't the request for ticketing also prop up from customer end that, hey, probably we want, I mean, if I'm raising something, I need a more formal communication, or did that prop up at all?
Yeah, so it's definitely propped up on the enterprise side and a little bit on a few of our mid-market customers. So I think what generally happens is as we get past the pilot period, we get into the launch, we provide like a very highly responsive experience in Slack, with our people. And then I think what we see is as we go into steady state, for longer periods of time, yeah, like the issues aren't very high, but when they happen, like, the customer wants to track these things because they themselves don't use Slack as an intense way with us as a sort of a customer vendor perspective as like heavily as we do to them, right? So for us, we are highly responsive to them in channel, but they're not necessarily like always like making like Glean their like 100% focus. So where they are like, hey, I want to like report an issue, and then that can turn into a ticket. That's really like helpful for them because then we can like dialogue over the ticket. We can also go like on our regular cadence meetings with them, go through, here's your open tickets and here's where they stand. So like you kind of lose those in messages and threads over time because like, especially when there is more dynamic messaging happening, like that thread that you're like interested in may be like way up and like harder to find, or you don't remember when it started because that's like a long-lived issue. So longer lived issues, we generally like are better manifested in tickets.
Right. Makes a lot of sense, right? Things that probably need to be tracked over a longer horizon. Slack is probably not the right interface suited for that, right? And probably ticketing, is a better way to both set expectations, measure, and ensure that things are tracked and get back to customers. But I mean, tell me about, if folks are at least initiating that conversation on Slack rather than email, how's that different from, simply, I mean, you could also say for more complex requests that why don't you raise a ticket on Zendesk? So why still stay on Slack? And also, as you talk about this, if you can share about, how ClearFeed can help you kind of streamline that well.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes customers just asking a question, and so that might not be a ticket. So those ones, it's just easy to just answer questions there. But when it is an issue, like we want to, like they might report it as something, and we might determine it is a real issue we need to go take a look at. So in that ability for us to turn that into a ticket right in Slack is like a real big thing for us, because we don't want to put friction back on, say, like, hey, customer reported the issue on Slack, and we go like, oh, go to this other system and report it. Like, that's just like friction to the user. It's not a great experience, right? What we want to be able to do is say like, hey, I'll go turn that into a ticket for you. Or like, hey, when we know we've agreed that this is an actual issue, you can just click the, the ticket emoji and that'll create the ticket, and then we'll work it from there. Great, everything is synced between Slack and that ticket. I mean, that's like, that's a like awesome experience for the customer, because then it's like they can interact wherever they want. They can interact in the ticket, or they can interact in Slack, or both, whatever. And then like, again, they see these updates happening. And so like, if there's other stakeholders, whether they be in Slack or whether they be on the ticket, they're getting the full information. They're getting the dialogue, they're getting the collaboration, they're getting the, oh, wow, like you guys had to go on a Zoom call for this. Got it. Okay, that's kind of cool. Like, I see, Glean's highly committed to it. And we as a customer are responsive to them, when they need something that will help solve this issue. So I really, really like that these two life cycles are tied together. It's something that Zendesk has this sort of concept of side conversations, but I don't think it's implemented very well. So I really like this notion about like conversation, ticket integrated, communications and content is flowing between the two, and ultimately turns into a resolved issue and close things up and close loop, and people can see that closed loop in both systems. I think it's fantastic.
And kind of interesting that, on Slack, the paradigm is public by default, right? So everybody wants to know, right? It's not that it's not one-to-one relationship or communication anymore, right? It's probably a bit more open communication from that context, right? And kind of,
yeah, it's also easy. One other thing that just like before I forget is like, it's also easy because like in Slack, I can bring in other engineers to the issue because they're used to working in Slack, but I don't really want to bring them into the Zendesk world, because that's not like really their core essence of being, is updating Zendesk tickets. But if I bring them into thread in Slack, and then we can keep working the issue together with customer, like, again, we see that all that communication in both channels. And then it's, again, easy to bring people in and to collaborate on something. So I really, really like that set of features.
So pretty interesting from that perspective. I also have one more line of thought that I want to spend some time on. So one of the big questions that a lot of people ask as they start scaling this kind of a configuration of engaging with customers is how do I measure this, right? How does it scale? How many requests am I dealing with on a daily, monthly, weekly basis, or what my response times are? How do you keep track of all of those things, right? So how did you deal with some of those things?
Yeah, so right now we like, for better or worse, we actually use ClearFeed for this, because like in one like our initial time when I was doing measurements, I basically just had to look at total Slack messages and say like, look, this is a approximate of our amount of traffic that we're doing, like, right, like interactions that we're generating and so forth. But that's not like really fair, because like some of those things are just like comments that customers are making, or maybe they're praising the product, or at like, again, things like that. So we really want to be able to like validate it and say what is the like the flow of like requests and things that we are sort of obligate ourselves to deal with. So if we like understanding that we can get that type of information from ClearFeed and not from Slack, like that's like, for us really helpful, because then we can measure those things. We can see, hey, the number of requests that we're getting from customers, something that they're asking for that we need to now interact with, like helps us again understand what that volume looks like. And then we can actually, over time start making these like great reports to say like, hey, when a customer goes to post sale, like their request volume goes down by X, or maybe it goes up by X, or maybe during the launch period, it goes up and then it goes down. And this is what steady state looks like. So if we can actually leverage that data and say like, on the average, these are like what like happens with mid-market customers, this is what happens with enterprise customers, and we can start like thinking about like, well, how do we use this to predict what our volume of things that we need to handle it are. And then that might also help us inform like how we might do staffing, right? And say like, hey, like if sales is intending to sell, 100 new customers this quarter, this is what our request volume looks like right now. This is currently handled by this group of people, CSMs and solutions and support folks. This is like what we would need if you're going to bring 100 more customers on. By scale nature, knowing that this is helping us like address this current volume, we think that we would need like 2 CSMs and 2 CSEs, and that will help us for the next 100 customers or something like that. Like based on these types of reports can help us give that type of information.
Pretty interesting, right? That pretty much helping you plan scale, right? As you kind of onboard more customers, plan how many CSMs or solutions engineers do you want to invest in, and so on. Pretty interesting. Greg, probably, I mean, one or two last questions, and then we should wrap up. But I'm curious to learn about,
Sure.
once ClearFeed or a system like ClearFeed is sitting on a lot of this data, they can enable a bunch of more interesting things. So have you come across, have you been chatting about what's coming up next and what's relevant for you? So maybe if you can share some of those things, that'll be extremely helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I think we would be really excited about from ClearFeed's perspective is like, is again like a feature that lets us to do one-to-many communications to our customers. And so like something that makes it easy, like say creating like collections of of channels that we can then use to push content and notifications to. And it could be like things, so like we have like a vehicle in the product to notify users about new release content. But like, unless a user goes to it and clicks on that, like they might never discover it, or they might never think to go click on the little present box icon. But if we can push communications on Slack for those people that are in those Slack channels, they can get like that as a like another, hey, here's another vehicle for us to announce something about new features. Or if we're like correspondingly, if we are having some kind of like a service impact and we know it's affecting these customers, we can actually push them updates rather than waiting for them to like report the issue. We can be proactive and say like, hey, Google Cloud is having some kind of a DNS outage. It's affecting your environment. We're working with them to solve the issue. Now that we've been proactive with them, they don't have to go like, hey, how come Glean's not working for me? Like we will be able to use those like vehicle like that. So for us, like we can channel the many to one for helping with response stuff, but also like now thinking about like, can we use the same product and facility to do like one to many, and be able to broadcast messaging about features, outages, maybe even certain maintenance that may be risky maintenance activities that we're doing.
Yeah, I think pretty interesting, and I'm sure the alternative to that is to really go channel by channel and then
Yeah, I did that before. It's painful.
I can totally imagine, as you know, you're dealing with hundreds of channels and then maintaining consistency, right? I mean, you're dependent on anytime you introduce humans in between, there are scopes for errors, missing out, and things not properly, right? So, I mean, can completely relate with this, and an area of focus for us for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I've taken a lot of your time. This is super exciting. Thanks for kind of taking the time out today. Maybe one last parting advice. So, if somebody today is starting to think about scaling, customer collaboration on Slack, one parting advice for them, now that you've kind of been at it for like more than a year now, right? So, one parting advice to folks who are just getting started or are planning to scale, what would you advise to them?
Yeah, I would say definitely, like, again, plan ahead and think about scale early on rather than letting it hit you over the head when you're not able to keep up with things. So again, like I said, the main thing I like about ClearFeed today is the ability to channelize the requests into one place, so you don't have to like always be like have your head on a swivel and clicking channel after channel, but basically be able to focus your energy and your activity on the things that are coming up as valid. Right? ClearFeed does a really nice job of being able to show, based on the communication, is there like an obligation? Is this an actual request or not? Right? If somebody puts in praise, that's not going to show up in the ClearFeed because they're like, just having good comment, and that's something you don't need to necessarily action right away. So like, again, focus your actions, and then anything else that's non-actionable you can get to on a less time sensitive basis.
Pretty cool. Thanks a lot, Greg, for your time. Thank you.